Hey everybody, Tom Barnas, Stories from the 78th D podcast. So thanks for watching, listening, subscribing, whatever you do. I appreciate it. And if you don't already, please do subscribe on Spotify or Apple Music or Amazon or the whole thing. Either way, it's on YouTube as well. But this is a behind-the-scenes look at what happens as I do stories for the 78 and throughout the week. Random things happen, and I thought it'd be fun to just chat about it on this platform. So this particular week, I've been holding off on a story for a long time, and the gentleman's name is Ruben Taylor, and his story is pretty incredible. I mean, the guy has a bunch of buildings in Chicago, specifically in the West Loop, before the West Loop is what it is now. And if you're not familiar with Chicago's West Loop or Fulton Market, it's pretty much the hottest neighborhood in one of the hottest neighborhoods in the United States, certainly in Chicago, right? So this gentleman, he's 90 plus years old, and he has been a part of that area before it went bad, while it was bad, now the uptick of regentrification and all the things. But he has an incredible story to tell. You see, his grandfather is the inventor of the first ever Wright Brothers engine. I am not kidding. A very cool story, and it's legit. I looked it up. I verified facts. His grandfather is Charlie Taylor is the gentleman's name. He worked for the Wright Brothers, and Ruben specifically remembers a time spending with his grandfather out in Detroit, specifically, I think probably Dearborn, Michigan, for a summer in like the 40s, talking about the Wright Brothers and how that all happened for him and all whatnot. So very cool story up on the website right now. And you'll see Ruben's lovely mug right there for the world to see. Very cool story. I don't want to spoil much more of it outside of that, but we talked for a good 20 minutes. He also collects Lincoln cars. I'm not talking like new ones, like town cars. I'm talking about Lincolns from like the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and he's got, I mean, I don't know if hundreds might be accurate, but certainly a bunch of Lincolns in various states or forms. He's got the machinery to repair these things and build new things. It's very cool. See the video because you'll see all the stuff I'm talking about. And it's in this unassuming building in Chicago's West Loop, right by the Epiphany Center. So if you know where that is, that's where this is. Very cool story. I interviewed a young lady who wrote a book called I Didn't Believe Him. And it's this book about, anybody who's a parent, right, who struggles with their kids going to school, because you don't want to believe that your kid, not that there's anything wrong with your kid, but you don't want to believe that your kid needs extra help. You just want them to have a fighting chance to do it, the same experience you had if you had that experience, right? So I thought that Dr. Daria's book, Irene Daria, she is a phenomenal book about her journey of listening to her kid who would come to her and tell her that his school isn't teaching him how to read, which that sounds ridiculous, right? Especially a 5-year-old saying, they're not teaching me how to read. And it was a good year of struggling at school for this kid and mom trying to figure out what's going on for her to finally believe her son, because as she puts it, the day that her son came up to her and said, "Mom, you want to see how I learned how to read?" And she's, of course. And then, by the way, Dr. Daria, she is a author, journalist, psychiatrist, a medical professional. I mean, she's not no dummy, is what I'm saying. So like this woman, is written for great publications throughout the world. So, I say that to give people grace, because, and this woman, by the way, is a tutor to the stars. Her roster of clients includes the children of like Tom Brady and the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, among others. So like this woman's well respected. And it took her a year to figure this out with her kid, because when her kid showed her how to read, he took the book, he put it behind his back, and then he just started verbatim speaking the book, writing it verbatim, just speaking the book. And she's like, "Well, why aren't you looking at the words?" He's like, "Well, I don't know how to read the words. I just memorize the words with the pictures." And that's how they taught him how to read. It was like memorization, not sounding out words. And that kind of goes into part of the story of the book, I Didn't Believe Him. And it's a fascinating journey of how, when difficulties at school affect family, how it affects family and whatnot. So fascinating story and a great read. And it made me feel a little less alone, if I'm being 100% honest, in dealing with my son who has ADHD and trying to get him to the best spot to succeed, which can be difficult if you don't know where that is. So through really good research of his mom and great doctors, we got him to a place where it seems like, I mean, his fifth grade was a struggle with school. And so far this year, I mean, it's 2 weeks in, it's complete opposite because we got him on a pathway for success. So very encouraging, and I can sympathize with it. And it's a book everybody is struggling with their kids, and you can't always. Her biggest message was that you can't always assume that your school that you're sending your kids to is doing what you think they should be doing or doing something correctly. It took her. I mean, this is Manhattan, and it took her to, show this information for it to change in New York City. So I digress. Great book. Otherwise, take a look, take a listen. Fantastic story. So if you are a person of history and you love history in Chicago specifically, you're going to love this story. So the House of Gluns and the Glunz Tavern, right there on Wells Street, on Wells and like Division. It is a Chicago institution, and it's fascinating because the House of Gluns started back in the day when Chicago was kind of just getting itself figured out after the Great Fire, right? The Great Chicago Fire. So on the street back then, right off of Halsted, these German immigrants came to Chicago, and you had Dr. Scholl's. You know the name Dr. Scholl's because of the company now. Well, it was a dude named Dr. Scholl's back in the day that set up shop. Also, Oscar Mayer set up shop on Halsted. And Glunz, all these gentlemen were all friends, and they were all from Germany. They're all coming to Chicago for work and whatnot. Well, after a while of getting him settled, Mr. Glunz, if you will, he set up House of Gluns because he missed his selection of wines that you can get in Europe. And he opened up like this wine shop in Chicago. It's been open for over 100 years. You walk inside of this place, it is spectacular and voted like the #1 wine shop in America. So that's, bougier than what's going on in San Francisco and Napa Valley. This place is awesome. Been around for years. And it's also connected to a bar. And the bar was opened up in like the 1800s, closed for Prohibition, did not reopen until 2012. Right on the corner of, like I said, Wells and Division, right there, Russian Division neighborhood. The old mayor of Wall Street, mayor of Rush Street, Harry Carey, back in the 80s. Like that's this area, right? And the bar, I mean, they had to like recommission the bar from that era to build it out. But the bar's cool. There's a lot of old memorabilia in there, but the wine shop is the crown jewel of this. There's a tasting room, and like I said, the wine shop's old, and they got wine from all parts of the world. And it's better than your Binnies, all due respect to Binnies and all that stuff, because this is somebody who's been doing it for years. The woman who runs it is like the great granddaughter, I believe. And who is not a young person by any means. She retired in, I think, 2008 to run this place. She retired. Hear that again. She retired in 2008, and she's been running this place ever since. That's how much she loves it. That's how much of a Chicago institution this is in the Old Town neighborhood. Very cool. So at the very least, if you're not a drinker, but you just want to see something really old and historic that has to do with the beginning foundations of Chicago, go to the House of Gluns. Check it out. Buy yourself a bottle of wine if that's your thing, or buy it for somebody else. It's a cool experience, and just a lot of fun. And occasionally, from time to time, I have a friend. Her name is Laura. She writes for the site. Her name is Laura Neary, and she writes for the site. She posted something a couple weeks ago about an apple farm up in Wisconsin, and then she went to Virtue Cider, and it is making a Virtue Cider sustainable farmhouse in the foothills, if you will, of Michigan. So check that out. Fun story, great spot. She likes to go up that way. She does a little bit of the South Side as well, and a lot of fun to see what she explores. The crown jewel of the past week, though, I gotta say, was taking my wife to see her first ever Pearl Jam concert ever And then not only that, but at Wrigley Field, which I think is like a double. It's like the cherry on top. If you've never seen Pearl Jam, seeing him at Wrigley Field is a unique experience. Now, you ask old school Pearl Jam fans, they might not agree with that just because they like their Pearl Jam in like, a proper music venue or like, a place like the United Center in Chicago. But I'm on that other end where, I love the Cubs. I'm a huge Cubs fan. And seeing a concert at Wrigley Field is great because the sound is pretty solid and the backdrop is amazing. Now, over the years, Eddie has hammed it up a little bit with playing at Wrigley Field and his connection to the Cubs and the World Series pursuit. He used to sing "Someday We'll Go All the Way" until they won the World Series. They don't really sing that anymore, for obvious reasons. But seeing Pearl Jam through my wife's eyes for the first time and her experience it, like there was a few times where she would just look at me and be like, oh my God, because of the way the energy coming off the crowd, the singing, the chanting, when you're supposed to do all those things during a Pearl Jam concert. And if you know what I'm talking about. It is phenomenal. And I would say if you've never seen Pearl Jam in concert, it's probably one of the few bands left in the world that can command a crowd the way and from a rock band perspective. Okay. Like, yes, I know Taylor Swift sells out, whatever. I get all that. And other bands, all due respect to all that, all those genres, Pearl Jam's just a little different. It's similar, not the same, but similar to like going to a Bruce Springsteen show. And, and Bruce is older now, like, so I'm talking maybe Bruce Springsteen like 10 years ago and 40 years before that, like going to a Bruce show was just this amazing experience, or going to a Stone show. But those bands, they're getting older. Their shows are changing because the energy is changing because they're getting older. And so that's why I say, and out of respect to all those bands, they've been great. I've seen all those bands on those legs of their journey. But, people get older, you change, right? And Pearl Jam's at that time where they still have that young man's blood in them mixed with, aging. I think Eddie's almost 60 years old, and the band, they're not young spring chickens, as my dad would say. So we got to see them. And my full disclosure, my wife is also 6 months pregnant. So going there was her first time and our future baby girl's first time hearing Pearl Jam. So in our house, that will be her first concert she ever goes to. But the experience at Wrigley was great. He talked about his experience coming, because Eddie Vedder's from Evanston, Illinois, and his family's from Chicago. So he talked about living in Chicago, going away, and then coming back. And one of his uncle, who took him to his first Cubs game, he talked about a story about him and his uncle driving up to Lake Forest and driving up to a football field with a chain link fence around it and watching a football team, which turned out to be the Chicago Bears. And this is, during their heyday when Walter Payton was playing for the Bears. So, Walter Payton sweetness, like the best running back in the history of NFL. And Eddie talks about a story of how he like ran into Walter Payton on like a gravel pathway that was off of like where all the other players were going, because Sweetness just kind of took this other way, because people want his autograph and whatnot. So Sweetness sees little Eddie Vedder. He asks him who his name. He says, "I'm Eddie." Walter Payton says, "Well, that's my brother's name." And Eddie says, "I know." And he's like, "Do you want me to sign that thing for you?" And of course, Eddie says, "Yes, sir, please." And he says, "Be careful, little man," And Eddie equates that to like when he's crawling up on the rafters when he was in his 20s and 30s as the frontman of Pearl Jam on the rise. He would always have Sweetness in the back of his mind saying, "Be careful, little man, take care of yourself." I don't know. It was a sweet moment. And he also talked about his daughter's first time ever going to Wrigley Field. And for those of you who don't know, Pearl Jam, most of the band lives out in the Northwest. I think Eddie lives right outside of the city of Seattle. And his story about him talking about Cubs, being Cubs fans, and being out in Seattle, it's Seattle Mariner territory. So Cub fans weren't all over the place like they are in Chicago, obviously. So he would talk about how he's like trying to teach his daughter about the Cubs. I did the same thing with my kids, and about the band Pearl Jam and Foo Fighters and rock music and Motown music and whatnot. So he's explained to his daughter, like Cubs, and he said every once in a while, they would be out and his daughter would be with him and she'd go, "Daddy, look, Cubs, Cubs." And I don't know, I get that, like when you see, like, it's like when you see somebody wearing your favorite band's t-shirt, you give them a wink and a nod and you feel like you're instantly friends with these people, right? That's what sports does. That's what music does. So he talks about her first time going to Wrigley Field. And before that, when his daughter points out his things, he goes, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting the story wrong. Let me make sure I'm getting the story correctly. So they go to Wrigley Field, right? And they're driving, and she starts seeing the Cubs, people everywhere. And she's like, Daddy, Cubs everywhere, Cubs everywhere. And he reaches down to his daughter's level and he says, these are our people. And that's how he ends the story. And it was a fascinating story. And you hear somebody tell a story about their first experience at Wrigley Field in the poetic way that Eddie Vedder can tell a story. And it was just a fun moment. And that's kind of like what it was for my wife to see Pearl Jam at Wrigley Field. It's kind of full circle moment. See what I'm doing there? Full circle moment where her first time seeing the Cubs at Wrigley Field, I'm sorry, first time seeing Pearl Jam at Wrigley Field was that special moment, because she has heard Pearl Jam playing in the house forever and a day, and that band meant a lot to me. I wrote an article on the website. It's called "I Took My Wife to Her First Pearl Jam Concert," and seeing the band through her eyes was like seeing them for the first time all over again. And Pearl Jam's the band that I like kind of put in a cupboard. It got me through some dark stuff in my life, and I put them in a cupboard and I just put it away for years, where I would just listen to safe songs, safe songs, elderly woman behind a counter in a small town, or daughter, or, even flow. Those are my Pearl Jam safe songs. And as we were getting ready to listen to the concert, or go to the concert, I should say, we started listening to some Pearl Jam, and a song popped in there that was in the cupboard that I'm talking about, that I packed away for like the last 10 years and really didn't listen. And it came on, and it just brought me right back to where all that stuff was when I put it away. And I like broke down in front of her, and it was kind of embarrassing. And she's like, what is going on? And I couldn't even control it. It just came out of nowhere. And I think that's what music is for me. It's compartmentalized things in life where I can remember where I was and whatnot. But this particular song and that album, really, I just haven't listened to it. I didn't even know that I didn't listen to it until that day of the concert. So a little of exercising some old demons and seeing the band through her eyes just made me fall in love with the band all over again. And I mean, they are my Mount Everest of music. Pearl Jam is up there with the Foo Fighters and, Bob Seger and others, I'll say. But the song, if anybody cares, the song was called The Fixer by Pearl Jam. And there's a specific line in the song where he says, I want to fight to get it back again. And man, oh man, that is a song. And those lyrics haunted me for years, and I'm glad that I got to experience it. Sadly, they didn't play it, but they played a bunch of other stuff that was really great. And 2 shows at Wrigley Field in Chicago in the summertime. There is not a better place in the world to see a concert. You can't. Red Rocks, no, not compared to Wrigley Field in the summertime, right off of Lake Michigan on Chicago's north side. Nope, sorry, not gonna win that argument with me. So either way, if you want to take a look there, I got some video of the concert, and I wrote a little story about what that concert meant to me and my wife up there, along with all the other stuff I've talked about. So head over to storiesfromthe78.com. You'll see all the fun stuff that I've got going on there for the website. And thanks for listening to this podcast and watching. Subscribe. Please do all the things. Tell your friends if you like this stuff. I do this all just on my own side hustle. And I try to make it compelling. So there you go. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you guys next week. We'll see you later.